Hello everybody, and thank you for joining us this evening for this iteration of our Tuesday talks, non-binary states and quantum superposition in digital art. This evening we have Libby Heaney and Paul Luckraft, who will be discussing quantum computing in art and delve into Libby Heaney's solo exhibition on show in our project space downstairs. Libby Heaney is an award-winning artist and quantum physicist who has held solo exhibitions at venues including Art Bite Gallery, London, and Light Art Space, Berlin. Heaney is considered to be the first artist to use quantum computing as a functioning artist medium, and her notable quantum artwork, Ent, has won the Lumen Prize and Falling Walls Art Science Prize. Paul Luckraft is Senior Curator Exhibitions at Zabludowicz Collection, London. He has a particular focus on the impact of contemporary technology on art, society, and the self, while also enjoying working with artists across a wide range of media. Commissioning new work and developing ideas with artists is central to his approach. Before I let them begin, I would like to announce that tonight's event marks our third release of our Gazelio POAP, also known as Proof of Attendance Token. They will be available, well, I'll stand by the desk after the talk with them available if you haven't grabbed one yet. We plan to release kind of community benefits for those who are regular attendees at our talks and events. So if you have any questions or need any help with that, please come find me. And thank you, I'll let them begin.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the kind invitation. Thank you to Libby for the invitation to be here tonight, and to Mila and the whole of the Gazelli team. It's a pleasure to be here, and really enjoying and looking forward to diving further into Libby Heaney's practice and the presentation here at Gazelli. And I guess the backstory of how this project has evolved and emerged and further entangled over the last couple of years. So I think tonight's talk will be probably kind of 45 minutes to an hour conversation with slides and some video clips. There'll be a chance to ask questions at the end also. And we're framing it really around the Ent project in the main. But this one project has numerous different parts that intersect. And Libby's work, I've always been amazed by how Libby works with really incredible technological tools, but also a great sense of narrative and world building and humour and play, and how these aspects can be brought together to also ask quite searching and provocative questions around new spaces of technology and who has the potential to work with these and what they can potentially offer us as a society, but also the potential pitfalls around how often these new spaces are co-opted and controlled by large entities. So there's a lot going on in Libby's work. Also, I think there's a huge amount of connections, both to art history, connections to how we also experience the world through our screens, and how increasingly technology, even its only digital technology, is allowing us to present installations in really immersive ways. There's actually, Libby's work contains a real plethora of different aspects we can perhaps touch on. But I think we'll also focus a lot on the work itself, because there's a lot in the work. And we might start perhaps by looking at the work that's here at Gazelli downstairs. So it's Enter the Garden of Forking Paths.
Correct.
Is that
yeah.
correct?
Yeah.
The titles are always good.
Yeah, the title actually comes from a Borges story called The Garden of Forking Paths, where he thinks about this myriad of, like the multiverse, of a plurality of different worlds, all existing at once. And I guess the game, in a way, allows audiences to enter into this world, Ent, that I built, and each person can take their unique journey through the world. So in some sense, a game is like a multiverse. You can play it and experience a different quantum phenomena and hybrid creatures in different ways, yeah. So that's where the title comes from.
And so when the audience enter the space downstairs, what are they seeing and what are they interacting with? Like, is it an interactive work, but also I guess you can view it as a sculptural piece and as a video work as well.
Yeah, exactly. Let's, I'm going to jump over to this. Maybe we can watch a little bit first. So this is the So it's a playable version of my artwork, End, which was originally commissioned by LAS as an immersive installation. And this version is the front screen of a playable version. So obviously people can move around in different ways. So what you're seeing here is an approximation of a quantum computer in the heavens. And it opens and these gold tentacles come pulsating out. And inside there's a plethora of hybrid creatures that have been animated using data from one of IBM's quantum computers. And then you fall from the heavens towards the earth. And you encounter, again, some more hybrid creatures. We'll get to, in a minute, we'll understand a little bit why the notion of hybridity is and kind of moving beyond the binary or standard taxonomies or sort of speciesist taxonomies. And these creatures are actually being teleported onto each other. So there's 3 different paintings that have been manipulated with quantum code, and they're swapping places, and you can't. So everything you see here, the patterns, the colours, even the textures on the sort of earth, the clouds above, the earth below, were generated using various phenomena inside the quantum computer. And we're going to, don't worry, if you don't know what quantum computers are, we're going to touch on that shortly. Quite a bit.
And is this the first time you've made the Ent piece interactive? In terms
Interactive,
of,
yeah.
Through a games engine?
Yeah. So the original, no, it isn't the first time. I'm going to move to the next slide so I can talk. I love the music, but yeah, I think it's easier to talk without it. So the original immersive version, we did a special performance in Berlin at Sharing Stiftung, where the whole immersive space was playable as well. So as I moved through the world using an Xbox controller, it created this huge, well, like the floor was projected on. We can skip to one of the latest slides, perhaps. So this is at Arbeit, but you can imagine the original version. You can imagine if you could play this version of the work. So instead of the animation just moving on sort of a fixed rail, I can sit there and move around the world and the whole space moves. And that was the first time we made it interactive. But that version takes about 4 computers to run. So it's kind of quite an intensive installation. So we haven't done it again since, but maybe one day, hopefully.
So this documentation is of the Arbeit Gallery space.
This is
in
the Arbeit
London,
Gallery
East
space,
London.
yeah.
And this is basically a room you enter, and you're fully immersed in it.
Correct.
So 4 walls and a floor.
Correct, yeah.
And so you're kind of standing or sitting, if you choose to sit, inside the animation.
Correct, yes.
But the animation is presented digitally using standard projectors, but mapped around the walls.
Yes.
But the actual imagery is made through a quantum process.
Yes, correct, yeah. So the different... Just pause it. There we go. So the way that I work, so maybe we can jump into the process of how I made Ent and therefore the game below. Obviously, I don't own a quantum computer, but certain companies around the world, so Google, IBM, a whole plethora of startups are in a race, and universities are in a race to build the world's first full-scale quantum computer. And depending on who you ask, it's either going to be 3 to 5 years away or about 20 to 30 years away. And you know that's like a whole belief system around investment and so on, and big tech does like to hype things up. IBM have publicly available quantum computers that anyone can access via the cloud. 5, well, they're small, basically. So first of all, I write my own code for these quantum computers. You can use, to get a little bit technical, you can use Python and a library called Qiskit, Qiskit, and you can write your own code, you can send it off to the quantum computers, you get put in a queue, and then about 3 hours later, if you're lucky, you get the data back, And then, the data looks really, really boring. It's just a list of numbers. Fortunately, because I have a background in quantum physics, quantum computing, I kind of have some sense of how to make this list of numbers look interesting, or to create patterns that perhaps couldn't be created with a digital binary computer, because a quantum computer is a non-binary computer. So the animations that we just saw in both the playable version downstairs of End and in the immersive version of End were generated using these patterns from quantum phenomena like superposition and entanglement, which we can touch on shortly. And so it starts to reveal the sort of queer nature of the universe, the non-binary nature of the universe. There's so much to unpack in that, isn't there?
But the universe that Libby has created in the project Ent is not a fully abstract universe, since it's got tangible assets, if you want to call it that, or recognisable features that we can see here, kind of spherical architecture, like an egg-like form, obviously landscape and water, so it's kind of mapping a virtual world. I mentioned world building earlier. And you have a process in your work of taking media through a journey, so you often work with language, of course, with your writing, and with coding as a type of language, but also you make watercolour paintings, or you make painted works. Then often you would then translate those into the quantum space.
Yes, correct.
So perhaps we could just map out some of the key features or elements or ingredients that are in the Ent project visually for the audience. So you'll see these architectural forms, I think I'm right, they all are derived initially from Bosch's painting, The Garden of Earthly Delights.
Correct.
Is that correct?
I'm going to jump back to the pictures of the install downstairs.
So one of my questions is, why in particular that painting, that iconic painting? You've chosen actually to reference some of the objects and forms from the central panel, which is probably slightly less familiar. The right-hand panel, I think, is the one that's the kind of the hell space that has influenced millions of artists, possibly, certainly thousands of artists. Certainly a lot of surrealist imagery derived itself or drew influence from Bosch, of course. But you're referencing the central panel, which is more the carnivalesque, sensual, playful, quite decadent space. This is like full of sort of life and possibility. Obviously, in a panel, you can see the kind of repercussions of that, the kind of moral story about the fall after the high. Yeah. But I'm interested in why that particular work to anchor the visual aspect of the work around, and why these forms.
Yeah, so I chose Bosch. I'd already been working with Bosch because I was thinking at this point a lot about technology as the new religion, and how the narratives around it, how its uses are very dogmatic, particularly in relation to surveillance. Technology, as we know, I mean, I'm not stating anything new here when we're literally being watched all the time through our phones, through different modes of computer vision. And so I chose this. So also in my work, I like to keep meanings quite open, because I think the open work, if you think of like Umberto Eco wrote about the open work years ago, and actually reference quantum particles. If you keep the meaning open, it's almost like there's a non-binariness at play within the work as well. So the reason I used Bosch is multifold. Firstly, the central panel is situated between heaven and hell. So it's suggesting where the future of quantum computing might go. In the immersive work, you'll notice there's no people in my work. There's just these hybrid creatures that I've painted. But in the immersive work, the people in the box start to become the bodies in Bosch's work, and they move together. The work, you notice I used floor projection, and what floor projection does is it kind of destabilizes individuals. Some people actually really don't like it and they walk out. Other people love it and start moving around in flow. They start to entangle with the visuals. And people always, in immersive work, start filming it, always. So they get their phones out and they start desiring new content to then share and feed back into this surveillance capitalist apparatus. So, you know, instead of naked bodies in my visuals, we've now got these collections of people going into the work and moving around and filming it. And so I'm suggesting that's the new desire to engage, maybe uncritically, with these technologies. Finally, also, again, the notion of hybridity. So we have, You can even see one of the watercolour paintings that has been manipulated with quantum code on the far left here. And that started off as a painting of a hybrid creature. So I wrote some quantum computing allows us to access genuine random numbers, like the universe is a dice, essentially, and we can use quantum computers to extract this randomness. And I wrote a code to make kind of an exquisite corpse, to piece together these body parts digitally, and then I'd paint them. And then I'd manipulate them with quantum code. So this is sort of quite a process going on. And I wanted to celebrate hybridity. I wanted to celebrate non-binary queer taxonomies that are beyond kind of the usual species that Western science has categorized and thought about. So in Bosch's time, these were condemned because they're outside of God's natural order of things, and they were seen as sinful. Monsters often represented our sins. But instead in my work, I centre them and enabled people to encounter them. And especially with the game, I can really get into them and explore the sort of non-binariness of our reality in new ways. Yeah.
And in this version we're seeing here, it's downstairs.
Yeah.
Do you see it as would you use the word game to describe it?
No,
or is that not quite right?
Yeah, it's a playable experience. A game suggests there's some gamification of the work. But what I wanted to do, the intention was to open it up for people to explore this world that I'd built. It was commissioned actually for a show in New York at NAMAD Contemporary and was put alongside Mobiles by Alexander Calder. The curator, yeah, right. So the curator, it was a really wonderful show. The curator, Kelly Taxter, wanted to think about what is the equivalent to Calder's work in the 21st century. So she chose artists like Danielle Braithwaite-Shirley, Jakob Kunsteinsen, and others, and myself, because we were working with movement and the digital in different ways. I mean, it seemed like a long shot to pire us with Calder's Mobiles, but it worked, and the reviews were good. The reviews of the show were good. So we remade it as the playable version for that show, and that really allowed users to, because apparently with Calder's sculptures, before he became so famous and part of the art historical canon, you used to be allowed to touch them and move around with them. So my idea was that people could then start to move around in my work as well. Yeah.
I think it's interesting you make that distinction between a kind of the gamification, the idea that there's problems to be solved or tasks to be achieved or worlds to be explored and kind of mastered, and the nature that I think a lot of artists exploring games engines through is like an open-ended process where like meaning eventually is quite slippery and potential like the motivation is quite slippery when you're asking an audience member or visitor or viewer or player to enter into the work without necessarily a clear instructional direction.
Yes.
And I think many artists are starting to work with game engines in that way. We recently had a show at Zabludowicz collection by Chinese artist Lu Yang, who makes kind of games engine worlds and then creates kind of cinematic narratives out of those worlds. But then many artists like yourself and Theo Trantafilidis are often using games engines to make, and in combination with AI as well, making systems that are self-generating, and so that you can have a space that isn't fixed and very much is constantly shifting. But I think where your work is very specific and quite different is the use of quantum really is a very tangible and concrete exploration of the notion of non-binary states, which I think takes that term, which has become very familiar today, and anchors it something that's very particular and very based in concrete science, even if that concrete science still feels quite hard, certainly for me, to get my head fully around. So I think it could be a good point could be a useful point to do a bit of a basics on some of the terms and see how then you have manifested those aspects of quantum through some of your projects.
Yeah, I think that sounds good. Shall we start with, I'll just jump to these. So these pictures that I'm flicking through, by the way, are the installations downstairs. So if you haven't seen it, I'd suggest you pop down afterwards or another time. So I was tempted to take this slide out. This is me as a scientist, and these are my Pardon?
I made you keep it in.
You made me keep it in, yeah. And these are my publications, and you'll notice they've got like really not understandable titles whatsoever. But my research was all around entanglement, quantum. We use the word entanglement in art so often, and quite often, and that's great, that's fine. I mean, we don't need to fix meanings or think about, you know, everything so concretely like a scientist would. But in science, the notion of entanglement has a very specific meaning, and it can be measured in the lab, and it's used to build a quantum computer. And the idea of entanglement in the lab is that if you have two things that are entangled, they're not just connected, but they become so, well, they are connected, but in a way beyond what we can imagine in the macroscopic world. So things that can become entangled are like atoms or molecules or particles of light, photons. And what happens is when they're entangled, they lose their own individuality. There's no longer any sense of the individual left. They're so deeply connected, they've dissolved together in such a way that if you try to retrieve an individual out, you destroy the system. So how crazy is this? Like, because we're so used to thinking about the individual in Western society. I mean, all of Western philosophy is centered around the individual. But at its most fundamental, at its most basic, so like I'm talking like small scales here, reality isn't about individualism, it's about relationality in a really deep way. And I just think that is so poetic and wonderful. So obviously as a scientist I started and I was like, oh, this is great. But when you get down to the nitty, I was a mathematician, so if you've seen Big Bang Theory, that was like what I used to be like. and oh gosh, and then, but when you do it day to day, it kind of becomes a little bit dry, yeah. So
perhaps this is a good point to ask. What was the journey? Like, what was the shift from being scientists and working inside big institutions to starting to think about or rethink how you might approach the same, I guess, subject matter, same topic, same area of research, but in a very different way?
Yeah, so when I was at school, like my A-levels were physics, maths, German and art. And I would have gone to art school, but because I was good at the physics and maths, and I come from a working class background, so I was very strongly encouraged to do something what people deem to be proper. I don't consider that, but proper. So as soon as I went to university to do physics, I was like, oh God, what have I done? But especially because I went to Imperial, which is just a science university. So yeah, everyone was like quite into the science. But I was still making art all the way through.
Okay.
I was still drawing and painting, like continuously. So it's just a matter of time of saving up enough cash to then go back to art school. And that took some time because obviously London is a very expensive city. So I always knew I'd go back to art school, or go to art school, but go back to university to study art. But it was just like when I could make that happen. So yeah.
But always with the intention that you would be like drawing on your scientific knowledge, or you thought at that point perhaps it was going to be a very separate journey, a different journey?
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So I'll tell you something that I don't often tell people, but I actually tried to go and do a part-time degree at Wimbledon in painting first, while I was still a scientist, working at Oxford, and going to Wimbledon secretly once a week. And that obviously wasn't going to work out. And I also tried, yeah, so it was going to be quite a different journey, yeah. But then there's the MA Art and Science at St Martin's. So I never did a BA in art because, I just did the MA. It was 2 years and felt kind of, so it's been just being in my art world and around lots of different artists and people like yourself over the years has been an education as well, of course. It's a different language and a different way of seeing the world, yeah.
And have you increasingly felt like you've moved towards a position where you're almost like a teacher, if that's right? In terms of, do you feel like you have is your function to also act as a go-between between the science and the arts and to reveal aspects of each to each other? Do you feel that's part of your, when you're making a project, developing a project, are you thinking about how this would like elucidate aspects of science, or is that too didactic for your approach?
No, I don't. I'm like, I love my scientist friends, but I'm not thinking about whether I can communicate art to them and likewise science to artists or just to illustrate science. I'm not a science communicator. I'm not doing outreach. It's really beyond. I mean, obviously, patterns in my work start to show the invisible processes inside the quantum computer, but that's not the point of my work, is it? It's about much wider discussions conceptually and also about materiality and kind of what it means for us to sort of look towards the quantum future.
Yeah, I think that's a key point. A lot of your work is it's pretty quite bodily and about sensory effects on the viewer, so that you're not expecting the viewer to necessarily pick up all the layers of kind of quantum knowledge that you're imparting on the work, or even all the layers of references you might be drawing upon from art history or other aspects, so that I think it's generous to mention that word at the start because there's different ways into the work and different ways of experiencing it.
Yes.
But perhaps we'll go on to the next slide and see a couple of the key... These are good pictures.
These are great.
So my question earlier, I think Libby has told me before, but I always forget the genesis, or the starting points of these works. I asked if this kind of golden, like beautiful science fiction shrine-like computer was real, and Libby said, well, yeah, there's Joe Biden looking at it, it's obviously very real.
Yeah.
So this is a kind of amazing object that is a quantum computer. So the images you see in Libby's works of these, I mentioned it's kind of like glowing, rotating structure, quite Bosch-like, is drawn from existing images you found in the real world. So there's a sense of speculation and science fiction, but also it's already anchored in what is already happening, even if it's kind of at research stage or not quite fully amongst us yet.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of IBM's quantum computers, and the reason I put the picture with Joe Biden in there is because there's like huge investment around the world in quantum computing at the moment, and no one's talking about it. We're talking about pop songs generated by AI, and that ship's already sailed. That's embedded within our lives. So I guess some of what I say with my work is kind of, you know, as the art world, one of the things that we do really well, I think, is critique technologies, like, you know, in ways that scientists or policymakers don't at all. So yeah, it's important to realise that this is being developed under our awareness, and it's going to change the world when it's developed. Actually, what you're looking at isn't the quantum computer, it's the fridge.
Oh, that's disappointing.
The quantum computer's these tiny boxes right at the bottom here. Quantum effects, this phenomena like entanglement or superposition where one thing can be in multiple states at the same time, these only express themselves, at least in the lab, when things are very cold. So down here is room temperature, and down here is colder than deep outer space. And all of these layers act to make the system colder and colder because you have to freeze all the wires. So this is like minus 273 degrees. You can't get any colder than that. And then atoms start to behave like slime. They start to ebb and flow and spread out in space, entangle with each other. And it's wild that scientists have understood how to control this, to process information in new ways.
Yeah.
Because it's like the universe is like fluid at this level, yet they're able to harness that fluidity to then process, like to run certain, or when they're fully developed, to run certain algorithms quicker than any supercomputer, digital computer ever could. And so for me, that kind of blows my mind a little bit as well.
And that increase in speed that quantum computing offers is because in digital computing, the computer can analyse certain aspects, but only in kind of linear fashion, is that right? Whereas in quantum computing, it can interpret or sense or rework things in multiple states at once.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so
that creates an exponential increase in speed.
Yeah, exactly. So in digital computing, you're doing each calculation step by step. So it's sequential, and that's because we have bits. So you can, in the chip in your CPU, you only ever, even if you've got like trillions and trillions of bits, you'll only ever have them in one configuration at once. You know, so it's a long list of zeros and ones, whereas a quantum computer can have all of the configurations at once. So even for 5 quantum bits, a qubit, which can be in both 0 and 1 at the same time, you can already get 32 different possibilities existing inside the computer at once. And each of those possibilities is a little bit like a parallel world. Like really, when you're programming a quantum computer, you're creating a set of parallel worlds within it, yeah, which is kind of mad as well. But I love that stuff. Like, yeah, there's sort of...
This seems a good point to talk about slime, I think.
Yeah.
Should we go on to slime?
Should we talk about slime?
I think so.
I can see my glass slime behind. So obviously quantum physics is a really difficult topic. You know, I studied it for many years and still don't fully, I mean, no one really fully understands why it happens. The model works to predict reality. So of course in my practice, I'm always looking for like new metaphors, new ways of understanding not only quantum particles, but to have wider discussions around quantum physics. So slime, there's a really nice picture of someone playing with slime at Zabludowicz when we did a performance there, Elliot. And quantum particles are like slime, so they sort of spread out. Like if we go back a little bit here, there's the top of this diagram on the left is what we imagine particles to be, the red dots, like snooker balls or footballs. But underneath, these wave structures are actually mathematical representations of what quantum particles are. They're slimy. They're like little worms. They're wriggling around. They're waves. They're not fixed, rigid. They spread out in space and start to become almost like slime. Yeah, and this, I just added this in. I mean, I'm so sorry to put a bit of maths in an art talk, but this is everything has a wavelength. So this is a calculation to show the wavelength of a human being. So even we're waves, which is...
The wavelength of a human being?
Yeah.
That's a new...
It was really small, so you can't see it.
What is our wavelength?
It's like 0 point and then 36 zeros. 1 5, yeah, so it's really small. But it does exist.
Every human being has the same wavelength?
It depends how heavy you are.
Okay. It's a delicate topic.
We won't get into that in the talk. But everything has a wavelength, but only microscopic things are small enough to start to reveal their wavelength, yeah. And then it can be like the wave can be like a width of a hair in the lab, yeah.
So the slime core piece that you've got a still of here emerged out of an invitation from ourselves at Zabludowicz to Libby to present a piece as part of the public programme for a show, in a sense. So this show was called Among the Machines, which was 13 artists from the collection, different show I'm thinking about there, installed in our gallery space in Chalk Farm in North London. And quite a lot of the show was thinking through this idea of collaboration with machines, but also how that also leads on to collaboration with other species. So it was kind of loosely thinking around the debate around the advent of general AI, when AI might become an entity can't quite control and become something that starts to dictate to us rather than us dictate to it. And so I was reading Stuart Russell's book about how the coming of general AI would be like the biggest single event in the history of humanity, which is quite a mind-blowing statement to make. But rather than necessarily working with artists that just worked with AI and data sets, there were some in the show, I was also thinking about artists that work with sculpture and installation and sound to really make this sense of us being, our presence in the world being destabilised and rethought through the advent of things like AI or quantum. And so our invitation was to Libby to present or produce a new project to be presented in the show, but it was quite an open brief. And Libby came back with the idea of a performative lecture, but that also encompassed a whole new video work that was then projected across the inside of our gallery space, which is actually a former Methodist chapel. So it's got a beautiful kind of undulating form in the background that then Libby's quantum computer-based form overlaid. So it's really kind of, really amazingly beautiful image, but underpinned through language. So perhaps we could talk about also how you've worked with slime as a material that you gave out to the audience to manipulate, to make the kind of lecture, in some sense, interactive, or at least sensory. But also you were thinking about the poetic potential of language and conveying that sense of sliminess and the connotations, both materiality-wise and also in terms of the darker or more disturbing aspects of how technology is used. Mm-hmm. And also, the projection was generated through quantum imaging, but also using a Blender software. So there's so many talks at once. But it was, in fact, you know, a lecture, performance on stage, and you were reading. So do you often perform on stage live? Was this quite a rare occasion?
Oh, well, this was the first time. So in some of my video works, I like playing with rhyme, and in my writing, like rhyme and streams of consciousness, to try and create a text that feels slimy and entangled, as in like rhyme. When you use rhyme, it almost entangles different parts of a text together because you have this patterning happening. And but yeah, to read something out loud, like to perform like this, which was a long stream of consciousness, was unusual. But I have worked with like Nabiha Iqbal before. We performed at South Bank Centre and at Sonar with some AI and sound performances with visuals as well. And I was performing with visuals live. But this was new, to be there reading a poetic text live, And
what was the sequence of making? Did you generate the video component first, then write a script in response to it, or did you almost illustrate your script through the making of the video work?
So we can let this play. There's no sound on the video because I was talking over it. So this first bit isn't generated with quantum computer. This is a blender render of some slime over a quantum computer. But in a minute it will click into I call it quantum video editing. It's generative using data from quantum entanglement, and there's 32 different videos playing at once. And depending on kind of the relations in the entanglement, you'll see different videos kind of emerging and then decaying. You know, if one relation is stronger, then that video rises to the top, but they're always playing. So in terms of making, I wanted, it was a bit of both. It was kind of iterative between the text, and there were certain themes in the text. So I was using slime as a metaphor for thinking about the quantum universe, slime in nature, how slime, like we're all slimy creatures, aren't we? Like in my mouth, not my nose. So it's like slime is like a liminal substance. It exists at these boundary spaces. So I knew kind of what I wanted to write about, and then I already created a bunch of renders, which I wrote about as well, but then went and found some found footage from YouTube as well, which I used in this. So you can see this is a quantum video editing. So you can see there's lots of shadow effects, depending on. And then this is when certain videos glitch in and out, that's the noise in the quantum computer, because quantum computers aren't developed yet, so they're still really noisy. They don't really work, to be honest. They're good for making art, but they don't do anything practical yet.
So in a sense, there's multiple videos existing in the same...
32 videos, all existing at once, with different opacities and transparencies based on the relations in the quantum entanglement.
But who determines the relations?
That comes from, that's generative, so it gets a bit technical to explain, but if you create an entangled state within a quantum computer, there's almost an infinite different ways you can look at it, and depending on how you look, you bring a different reality into being. Because the act of gazing or looking in quantum changes the state of reality in a random way. So I used that, so I'd set up this entanglement, the same each time, look at it in different ways, and then that randomly creates the relations. So it's almost like the universe is creating relations.
But it's not necessarily random or automated in the sense that there's got to be a subjectivity looking at it to...
So I would decide how to look at it.
Yes, so and still then, your decision-making process is still paramount.
Exactly, yeah. But then I wouldn't determine exactly what I got out. That comes from how the plurality collapses back down to being Newtonian,
So do you think of it as a collaboration with machines, with technology? Do you see it as, like, is it an entity you're collaborating with in a sort of an equal way? Do you feel it's got that presence? Or do you still see it very much as a set of tools that you can utilise and control and use?
Yeah, I think because I'm a scientist by background, I see it as a set of tools. Collaboration suggests, I do believe every tool, everything has its own agency. You know, if I picked this up and the bottom fell out of it, that's had some agency in my world, and it's acted back on me. But I don't necessarily believe that I'm collaborating with these tools. And I've thought about that a lot, because I know artists do talk about collaboration. And I think for me, it's because I've been so deeply involved with the scientific side that I'm still thinking of it in terms of a tool set. Yeah, because we don't really say we collaborate with Photoshop. Yeah.
But you do collaborate a lot with other humans.
Yeah, I do collaborate a lot with...
in different aspects of the work. And
yeah.
the R-Byte show we mentioned, and also the LAS show that just preceded that involved collaboration in terms of making the quantum immersive video space, but also you were working with others to narrate over the top of some of the shorter videos in the R-Byte show, which we'll talk perhaps in a second about that kind of narrative device you employed in that show. You collaborated with artist Rosie Gibbons on making some sculptural works as part of the installation to kind of house the R-Byte show.
Yes.
So what is that process of collaboration like? And are there regular collaborators you work with on every single project, or is it sometimes that you will bring in people with certain expertise or skills or different perspectives?
Yeah. I think collaboration is so important, because you can't do everything yourself. You can't be in, you know. So I worked with James, Gabe and Jira on Ent as the developers for the immersive installation, the Unreal developers. And I knew James from Somerset House, where I have my studio, and he actually used to have a record, or work for a record label called Quantum Natives. So him and I have had lots of conversations about quantum physics previously. So he seemed, when I was, when I was commissioned by LAS, he seemed like the natural person. Obviously, he's a really talented Unreal Engine developer and producer, so he seemed like the natural person to approach first, because he has an interest in this subject matter, which makes it easier to communicate kind of complex ideas, and also a willingness to experiment, because it's, when working with quantum computing, there's not like, you know, with AI, there's models that exist already, and then we as artists use them. There's nothing really like that yet. There's a few little things, but not with the sort of flexibility I'd want as an artist. So I write my own code, but that means that you have to kind of bear with me as I kind of figure out what it's going to do, and then we talk together,
Just remind me if the question is okay, I'll jump in a question.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
That there's perhaps inherently a sense that you're always going to be struggling to or reaching to describe the effects you want to explore to others you're collaborating with, when this is such a potentially quite complex thing to navigate in itself, quantum computing, but also there's inherent tension with trying to picture or materialise quantum states or quantum phenomena through the sort of limited means of digital production and presentation. So is there always a sense of a slight frustration there, sort of reaching for something you can't quite grab? And how is that also quite a challenge in terms of collaborating with others, in terms of communicating what you want to explore in the work?
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's actually impossible to represent quantum phenomena because they exist in a much higher dimensional space. So in the Newtonian world, our macroscopic world, what we get is like inadequate representations or approximations. I think that's why I jump between media quite a lot, because I always say I'm sort of circling the void. I'm trying to get close. And I think for me, that's kind of fun. I don't want to literally represent, oh, look, this is what entanglement looks like, literally. So I do feel like collaboration, I think we use a lot of sketching, a lot of like traditional drawing, a lot of like language again. You know, can you make this really slimy and oozy, or feel like you're dancing, or like going to spin you out, or just certain ways of being, states of the body that we all know. How can we capture that in an immersive environment or through a games world? And then there's tests, and we have a group discussion, and then try again. So it's quite experimental as a collaboration. I don't really find it frustrating, because I think, in my opinion, we work really well together. I think they probably did feel kind of frustrated at some point.
Well, perhaps the frustration that implied wasn't so much about frustration with the process, more that there's a there's always going to be a sense that you're motivated or inspired or driven forward to the next project because it is almost unachievable. There's a sense that you're pushing into new territory or working through different ways of exploring similar sets of ideas, which feels like there's a kind of real energy in the work because you're pushing it, pulling it in different directions. Yeah,
I think so, yeah. It's like, I can't get close to these, I'd love to take you all into a physical parallel universe with me. That would be sick, right? But I can't, so how can I bring those sorts of ideas and question what they mean for us and the future through these different media? And I always, there is a bit of a disappointment, but that you can't literally open up into another universe. But I think that's why games engines and digital technologies are so useful at this point, because games engines are built on physics. It's usually Newtonian physics, but sometimes you do get computer games where you can move and go through the world in ways that would be totally impossible in the physical world. So I think games engines are definitely the one for me.
So is a quantum games engine possible?
In the future, I think so, yeah. Yeah, that's going to be fun.
5 or 50 years.
Oh, I hope I'm alive. I'll build. Well, I don't. Yeah, I'm not going to build one myself, but I definitely use one. But you could. Yeah.
I wanted to ask about the Arbeit show and the kind of narrative elements there you employ, because you mentioned earlier that you didn't include people in the animations or figures in the animations for Ent because the people that were inside the immersive space, photographing themselves, often became the bodies in that world. And in the Arbeit show, you also added a kind of a narrative element of a fictitious company, a big tech company called QX.
QX, yeah.
And there were some sort of screens that were outside the kind of black box projection space that were there as kind of intro advertorials, I guess you call them.
I call them, extended adverts. Yeah.
And these were kind of pretty convincing. You were borrowing from the language and the kind of graphic language of, I guess, big tech or Web 2.0. And how fully fleshed out has this fictional entity QX become as a company? Is it something you'll return to as a narrative storytelling device, or was it particularly focused around that particular installation at Arbeit?
Yeah, I'd like to come back to it, definitely. So QX stands for quantum experience, and the conceit was that the immersive installation was actually built to sell the tools, to sell quantum computing, and then in one video, the final video, it's kind of like in the future we'll be using these sort of immersive installations to extract your data. So it kind of allowed people to understand in new ways, like using quantum computing, so in different to kind of how our data is extracted now, and kind of really tapping into our brains in the sense that people have already written papers showing how they can use quantum computers to extract. Scientists have written papers showing how they can use quantum computers to extract long logical states of your brain using some sort of brain-computer interface. So it's playing on real science, but then fictionalizing it, using real language from big tech and the fictions they create to sell their tools, right? But then weaving that in with my own fiction to speculate about the future here. I would love to go back to QX. It just depends on the right opportunity, because I think you can. I think there is a trope in art of using fictional companies, and I don't mind sort of going in that way. But one of the things that I was trying to do with this was, at some point, the QX is corrupted by quantum data. So slime again starts glitching, and things are bad underneath. And one of the questions I was thinking about is does the sort of the queer potential of the radical potential of quantum that we're discussing, the non-binariness, that's forgotten by the scientists. They don't care about that. They just really care about making a quantum computer and therefore making money and kind of more of the same, more surveillance capitalism, more and then some new applications when they're fully developed as well. So what I was thinking of is, can we reappropriate this space with the radical potential? So there was a fictional company, but then I was really trying to kind of push something else being there at the same time. And so it's again this tension of which way will the future go as well. Yeah.
But in in the current state of quantum computing, is there a potential for it to be led by or shaped by people outside of the bigger corporations? Like, is it the investment required so high that it's almost inevitable that it's going to be controlled by the biggest players at the minute?
Yes and no. So there's a company, I was speaking to someone who works for a startup called PsiQuantum, and they have pledged, so it's always this race, but they claim they're going to be the first. But they've pledged a proportion of the limited capacity of the first quantum computers to solve climate problems. So I think it really depends on who is first. If it's a big tech, if Google is the first, then it will probably follow along with the ethics that Google have had so far, like Zuboff writes about in The Age of Surveillance Capitalism. But if it's a smaller startup where they have a different ethical set of questions, because they're able to do that, because they're not embedded within these big structures, then perhaps it could be a different future. But it's still this sort of techno-solutionist, linear, it's still extractive capitalist future they're imagining. I was fortunate to talk to their sort of policy director who's in charge of the climate side, and yeah, they're just like, we just want to extract as much, limit the amount of carbon we're putting into the world, and then after that we can start thinking about how you might use these devices to think about more circular economies, and because quantum computers are really good at optimizing complex systems, because they can sample everything at once rather than going, is this a good optimization? No. Is this one a good optimization?
Yeah.
No.
So potentially the efficiency that quantum computing could bring could be potentially used in a positive way to make us more efficient in terms of how we use, and less impactful in terms of resources and ecology.
Massively, yeah. So there's really like a whole set of problems that could benefit the world. But when I say the world, is it the world? Because we know how technology is never equally distributed throughout the world. The global south aren't really involved with quantum computing, as far as I know. There's sort of more negative sides as well. Yeah.
I think your work quite subtly, but definitely does start to ask these questions around how the kind of visual spectacle, immersive spectacle of art and entertainment can be utilised potentially by these companies that are also leading on the research and development to almost kind of prototype, test things out, but also to give a visual way into their projects. And that can obviously, these can have amazing, spectacular results, but also potentially can be quite problematic. So I think in the show Arbeit, where you had this kind of fictional big tech company, you were trying, I think, to also not to kind of take away or satirise your own work, but I think you were sort of pointing out aspects of your own work that could be read in different ways. So you're almost kind of second-guessing your own practice.
I was criticising myself.
In real time in the show.
Yeah, but I do feel like when you make an immersive experience, they are typically very commercial. They have been criticised for being propaganda machines for big tech companies. Certain artists may not have that critical slant in their practice, so I wanted to add, I really care about the future and the world we live in, as we all do, but I really wanted to make sure that I sort of acknowledge that, and it's fun to kind of think about the different angles of your work, and again, I'm not letting the meaning rest necessarily, I'm opening it up in different ways, and I do feel like if End continues, is exhibited again in the scope, perhaps QX or other facets will be developed further, especially based on more current sort of developments in quantum computing as well, yeah.
So presenting the work in Berlin with LAS, was that, did that bring those questions to the fore almost, where you had that chance to present an immersive sort of space in which the audience entered? Did you have a desire to perhaps push that further through subsequent projects? So
the plan was, there was lots of discussions around whether we should have any additional content around work, like the Arbeit show. And LAS at that time didn't have their own space. And the space that we partnered with was Sharing Stiftung, which is, if you haven't been to Sharing Stiftung in Berlin, it's this beautiful box space, which lent itself really well to just a unique immersive projection. And there wasn't space for any additional work. So the sort of criticality and these discussions came through the texts. So there's a text with Kay Watson from the Serpentine, and in conversation with Kay, and also Rebecca from Arbite wrote a really lovely poetic text about the work as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Should we look at the most recent work you've made?
Yeah, shall we look at that?
Yeah.
So this is actually about climate change and quantum computing. And these are some images from the different installations of Ent at Sharing Stiftung, so you can see the perfect. And it's, depending, I'll just say very quickly, sorry Paul,
Sorry, okay.
Depending on scale, it really changes how you feel in the work. Like this is like a 10-metre space, and then at Arbite was 5 metres. It really has an impact on like how you move, how it feels in your body.
What would the optimum be? Much bigger?
No, actually,
No?
I think I like them both. I think the more intimate space where you're really kind of like not just immersed, but you feel a bit
Swallowed up by it.
swallowed up by it. Yeah, I was in my head. It was like attacked. I'm like, I don't want to say my work attacks people, but it's there. It's present.
It's a 10-minute loop. Is that right?
Yeah, so there's two different versions. There's a generative version, which has a variable time, and the video version is 10 minutes, yeah. What I should say, the dream installation would be to have back projections and to have the ceiling projected on as well, so it's the full 6 sides. But
Would that be particularly destabilising?
I think that would be really weird,
audience?
yeah.
You might get some slumped bodies.
But then you'd feel like you've really entered this other dimension, this parallel reality outside of kind of the more material world. Yeah. I don't know how it would be. It might be terrible, but I really like experimenting with these formats. So just to wrap up, I guess, the work is called Q is for Climate, ? And it's a single channel video with sound. And it was commissioned by Utopia in Zaragoza, Spain. And it's still on display there now. So if you happen to be in Zaragoza, please do check it out. And it's going to, I don't think it's been announced yet. Tomorrow, I think it's been announced, but it's going to a place in, a venue in Amsterdam as well, in quite a different format compared to this. The work kind of considers, it's based around my research into quantum computing and climate change, but then proposes an alternative way based on the sort of non-binariness of quantum physics, away from the kind of extractive capitalist possibilities. So companies like IBM are partnered with ExxonMobil, so they're already working with big oil. God, this is being recorded. I'm going to get like... but then you've got like, and also Honeywell as well, which is a big US company, are working on their website. It's like we're using quantum computing for oil drilling and optimization and to expedite exploration. It's like, what the hell, man? Like, we do not need to extract any more oil at this point. I know there's like subtleties around that to do with the war in Ukraine and so on, but generally we need to be moving to a low carbon economy. And I've already mentioned, I've already mentioned, what was I going to say? The more positive side of this. So it kind of looks at this visually and then goes into an alternative as well. I'll just show you, at the start of a video, I'm using traditional video editing, which is, I'll play it, I find it hard to talk and have sound at the background. But this is more, it's built in the games engine again, in Unreal, not Unreal, Unity Games Engine. And at this point, it's kind of normal video editing with some layering. So there's hard cuts and transitions, which are synonymous with digital computing. And then towards the end, it has this quantum video editing. Again, the same code as the one I used for Zabludowicz, where there's 32 different videos playing at once.
The tentacles returned.
Oh yeah, so this is the trailer. So this is the trailer. So this is the quantum video editing. And because I'm not throwing away any footage, it's all there. There's no hard cuts. everything exists at once. Wow, that was short. Because there's no, it's like kind of a non-hierarchical video editing that is like values all subjectivities, all narratives, because everything exists. I'm not sort of throwing footage away and editing it in its traditional way.
And is that like a seven-minute video?
A 7-minute video, yeah.
And is there a narrative thread to that piece, or is it very much pushing towards a more like simultaneous space, like you mentioned, where things exist simultaneously, not in isolation?
Yeah, so there's no narrative to it. It's effective sensory again, yeah. So the decision was to kind of communicate through the video editing, the sort of traditional video editing versus the layered quantum video editing.
And might this piece be taken into a games engine space as well, and developed in that way, so audiences immerse themselves in it and interact with it, or not? Yeah,
because of if you work with games engines, I'm using a lot of transparent layers in the video editing, and I don't know if a traditional games engine like Unreal Engine would deal with almost 32 different spaces layered up at once. I think it would probably break even the best computers. Because it's this idea of like, at what point can we have this sort of, all of these parallel worlds all layered up at the same time? And I think digital computers have to be powerful, even though I'm using quantum computing to animate it. Fundamentally, we have to revert back to a digital interface, because we don't have we're not interfacing directly with quantum computers at the moment. Yeah,
so you're constantly shuffling between possibilities that you're exploring in quantum, but then the reality is what you have to present the work through to people in.
Yeah, and that's difficult because the possibilities within a quantum computer expand exponentially. That's where their power comes from. But then, of course, like Unreal Engine or Unity, while they're wonderful, can't handle that amount of data or graphics. So you're kind of reducing back again.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I think it'll be a good point to open up to any questions. I think we've covered a lot of ground. I'm sure there's lots of aspects that could be
thanks so much
further explored. So has anyone got any question to ask of Libby?
Yeah, thank you for the talk. It's just very interesting. My question is, how many different particles can entangle themselves?
How many different particles can entangle themselves?
Yeah.
Oh, like thousands and thousands. If you build a quantum computer, you'd need millions and millions entangling all at the same time. That's why it's so difficult to build one,
Okay, so if we affect one particle, all the other ones, they will be affected as well?
Yeah. Depends on the connectivity. So if you have some entangled here and some entangled there, but if they're all entangled together, if you do something to one, it affects the whole lot, That's the strength of it. It's like this huge parallelism, like a giant Rubik's Cube, but of, particles. It's hard to explain. And there's different ways of kind of approaching it, even in science, so,
I take it that the particles that can entangle themselves, they will be the same ones, right? So it will be electrons with electrons and photons with photons and all of that, right?
You can entangle different types of particles. As far as I know, no company's trying to do that with a quantum computer, but you can entangle a photon with an atom, and all sorts of different exotic types of entanglement exist,
I was really interested by what you were saying about the kind of terminology associated with quantum computing and their kind of poetic relations. Like what you said about this particles have to be cold to express themselves. It's really funny to think about that expression in terms of like an art historical context. And I wonder, when I first became aware of quantum computing, it was like with the kind of terminology that is used by the corporate expression of it, like quantum supremacy and all that kind of stuff. And it's got this really like concerning power relation or power kind of association. And I wonder whether you could comment on that, and whether there's a possibility for a kind of non-corporatized terminology around the subject.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I'm glad you brought up the problematic language that scientists and big tech or startups use around quantum computing. Quantum supremacy. Like, surely, like this is what they call the point when quantum computers solve a problem that could never be solved on a digital computer. Some companies now call it quantum advantage, but it's all about power and hierarchy, as opposed to the non-hierarchical nature of the actual physics. It's like there's this massive disjoint there, which is just like mad. I feel that a language, scientists, in my experience, are quite pragmatic. They don't necessarily always think about the ethics of what they're doing. They do care, it's just that they're focused on the science, that's their job. And so a sort of more quantum style language, like a language that is that is inspired by quantum physics itself, which is kind of like the poetry that I wrote for the performance at Zabludowicz, would come from either the arts, humanities, like Karen Barad, of course. I'm sure lots of you have read some of their texts. Their style of writing is very playful, using kind of words like response hyphen ability to sort of signify the multiplicity in language. So I think there is and there's probably other people working with this that I'm not remembering right at this moment, but there is so much potential there, and like you don't need to work with a quantum computer to explore sort of quantum forms of language. There is like, yeah, there's some poets working with quantum forms of language as well. I forget their names right now. So yeah, I think it's an invitation to artists, writers, other people to kind of explore these things. That would be like really cool to, I just think it would be interesting to have multiple voices looking at these things, yeah.
Hello.
Hey, John.
How you doing?
Yeah.
You're saying that quantum computing will change the world. Is one of the things that it will change, will it be able to solve nuclear fusion?
Yeah, it's really interesting you've mentioned that. Actually, people are already working with this. I know, I don't know if I'm meant to say this, but the director of Light Art Space, her husband is actually working on that problem. He's not a scientist, he's the CEO of a company. So trying to understand, because one thing quantum computers are very good at is simulating other quantum systems, because digital computers can't do that. Because these quantum, you know, like nuclear fusion is a quantum process. It involves atoms and plasma, and magnetic fields and so on. And that's really hard for digital computers to understand because it gets complex very quickly. So yeah, quantum computers will be able to do that. That's why they'll be able to like understand like photosynthesis. So then we can have things like biomimicry, so new generations of photovoltaic cells and so on. So there's so much scope for understanding the microscopic world, including nuclear fusion, yeah, which obviously is huge if they can solve that problem.
So is it just is it kind of a like a mathematical problem that we have at the moment with nuclear fusion, as if we just don't have enough power to sort it out?
I think the mathematics is pretty well understood. This is my understanding of it. I'm not an expert compared to quantum physics, but it's actually achieving it in the real world settings and getting more power out than the power you put in. So one thing quantum computers will be able to do is to check different physical setups and how they interact with the plasma, levitating the plasma. Because if you don't know what nuclear fusion is, it's like trying to create the sun on Earth in a controlled environment and then extract the energy from that. And it's people want to do this because it's like a clean energy source. So they'll be able to optimize different physical setups, how to do. So there's so much they could do with this, yeah. Test different types of fusion using lots of different things. I could go on.
Thanks so much for the talk. Really enjoyed it. I wanted to ask about the sound, and it's already a huge part of the immersive experience, and downstairs you can definitely see it. But I remember you mentioned that you started to work with it processing through quantum, and I was just wondering, I just wanted to hear more about what it's like for the sound.
To work with quantum computing?
Yeah, it's like how is this medium working?
Yeah, so I'm not a musician or trained in sound at all, but I was like, I could use the same type of code but slightly different to that I used to do the video editing to write a quantum synthesizer and a sequencer. Like, so I'm really into electronic music, so I was like, I'll just focus on that sort of experimental side rather than trying to understand music, because I'm just not going to do that. So, I mean, we can listen to it. It's part of this the sound on this video that we just listened to, and it's kind of like different layers of different frequencies or sounds existing at once. I don't know if it's.
But when I did a previous studio visit, you were talking about going down to the banks of the Thames and taking field recordings. So you were actually capturing sounds from the environment that you were taking them back through your quantum synthesizer.
That was with AI, yeah. Yeah.
So you've been capturing sounds in different ways. This is sound generated purely through quantum.
Okay, so this is, there's some AI sound. Actually, I've repurposed some of the sounds that I generated from those field recordings. Bird sound, chanting, water from the banks of the Thames. And they got processed using like a waveGAN. So I was really interested in trying to find a space where like a bird sounds like water, or like these hybrid moments where you get these like voices that are like not a bird or not water, but both at the same time. So I'm kind of using a quantum approach to working with sound. This has some of that in as well. We can just play it and listen to it, yeah. So this is a quantum synthesizer. And it's the patterns in time that are uniquely quantum, I think. It's, yeah. I don't know what I think about it, but I like experimenting with just to see what comes out. And this, you can hear the chanting in it, but the arrangement is all generative using the data from quantum entanglement. Yeah. So there's like a layering of different voices. Yeah. It's pretty
amazing. Cool. Thank you. Were there any final questions?
Thanks. I think that was cool.
That's one thing. Oh, it's more.
Hi. I'm not. I've got like 1,000 different questions, so I'll try and keep it to one. But from my very limited understanding of quantum, and most of it comes from like your work, but it really strikes me how it's such hard to grasp science, but like, and it's getting so like. It's obviously so complex, but then it seems to, like I always think of science as like getting further away from like spirituality and supernatural, and it seems like you go so far into it and then it just like opens out into this like mind-blowing world of possibilities. And I guess what I'm trying to ask is how that might have, your experience of learning about this and maybe how it's changed your worldview.
It's a good question. As a scientist, scientists hate spirituality being equated to quantum physics. It's like they're one of their worst things in the world. I actually think quantum physics is really spiritual. It talks about things like ghosts and magic. And that is implicit in my work, I think, as well. But my worldview, so as a scientist, I was kind of a bit wrapped up in the dogma around that. But as an artist, over time, my mind has opened up into thinking about, because scientists are still using reductionist methods to understand this thing is not, by any definition, reductionist. So, you know, people would say, are we all entangled? Western science would say, no, we're not. But they're using these Newtonian tools to sort of ask that question. Maybe when we have a full-scale quantum computer and some sort of quantum computer vision, we'll be able to say, yeah, actually, we are part of something bigger that we didn't even realise about. If they use a quantum computer to look for those things. there's stuff like, I was thinking about death and quantum physics the other day for certain personal reasons. And thinking about how in quantum physics, in quantum computing, there's a law where you can't destroy any quantum information. It's impossible to copy it. It's impossible to destroy it. So when someone dies, what is that? Where does their information go on the atomic level? How are they distributed? Is their mind distributed? Is their body distributed? What happens if they're cremated? Like, so I was chatting with my friend about this. You know, so there's all of these questions that scientists just don't approach. So maybe as artists and in the humanities, we can start asking these questions, these really fundamental questions about what it means to be human. Yeah. So it's a good one. Thank you.
Great. Well, yes, I think we'll wrap it up there and say huge thanks to Libby. It's been an amazing conversation. Thank you.
Well, thank you to you as well. Thank you very much.